Its purpose, of course, is to awaken people's awareness.
What can happen in 1965?
They didn't just vanish. These 1970s traditions were quietly erased from your life like childhood memories someone else decided you didn't need. What if the best parts of growing up were stolen, one forgotten habit at a time? There was something sacred about Saturday mornings in the 1970s. Before the sun had a chance to fully warm the sidewalks, children would gather around boxy television sets, cereal bowls in hand, as the glow of cartoons lit up the room. There were no on-demand options, no rewinds, just that fleeting window where animated worlds came alive. Shows like Scooby-Doo, The Jetsons, and Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids became more than entertainment. They were rituals as ingrained in childhood as scraped knees and secret treehouse meetings. Those opening theme songs became the soundtrack of a generation, each one latching onto memory like the scent of crayon wax or the feeling of Velcro shoes. Parents knew this time was sacred too. It was the one morning a week when the kids were quiet, transfixed, and content. The living room became a miniature theater, complete with the scent of toast and the sound of muffled laughter. Today, we scroll endlessly for something to watch, barely paying attention to what plays next. But back then, if you missed it, you missed it. That was part of the magic. Each cartoon was a one-time event, and those who were there remember. It was the childhood version of an appointment, circled not on a calendar, but etched into the rhythm of every kid's week. And when the final show ended, it felt like something wonderful had passed, just like the decade that gave it to us. They were not just jewelry. They were emotion captured in metal, worn like a secret code on your finger. Mood rings did not just change color. They whispered things you were too young to say out loud. When you slipped one on, it felt like magic. Blue meant calm, green meant normal. Black, well, no one wanted to see black. The science behind it was simple, but no one cared. In the 1970s, the idea that your feelings could show themselves in color felt like truth. These rings were traded like treasures on the schoolyard. You watched your crush's ring for signs. You checked your own to see if it matched your mood, or maybe told you what mood you should be in. It made your hands feel important, as if something hidden inside you finally had a way out. Kids compared colors, speculated meanings, and even blamed the ring for their temper or shyness. It was all play, but it meant everything. Adults wore them too, sometimes seriously, as if their stress and calm could be measured like temperature. Mood rings promised answers. They gave shape to confusion and mood swings and heart flutters. They made your emotions visible even when you could not find the words. Today, we track our health with digital watches and screens, but nothing feels quite as mystical as a little color-changing stone that said, without saying, "You feel something, and that matters." Soul Train was not just a show. It was a revolution in sequins, sunglasses, and rhythm. It came on like a pulse, strong, steady, and impossible to ignore. When the first beats dropped and the Soul Train line formed, you did not just watch, you felt it. Hosted by the iconic Don Cornelius, Soul Train brought black music, dance, and style into the living rooms of every American household. It was bold, it was loud, and it was beautiful. For many kids and teens in the 1970s, it was the first time they saw joy that looked like them reflected on screen. Funk, soul, disco, all of it found a home on that stage, and in turn, in hearts across the country. The dancers moved like they had electricity in their bones, and you wanted to move like that too. You tried, in your living room, hoping no one saw, or maybe hoping everyone did. Soul Train was culture. It gave birth to trends. It dared you to dress with flair, to walk with rhythm, to be unapologetically cool. The show said, "This is who we are," and it said it with pride and funk and freedom. Even if you could not dance, even if you did not understand the lyrics, you understood the feeling. It made you want to live louder. Today, you can find clips online, but you cannot replicate the feeling of watching it live when the whole country held its breath and got down together. They were not just about food storage. Tupperware parties were secret engines of community, commerce, and independence, especially for women in the 1970s. Step into a neighbor's home and you would see it. The pastel plastics lined up like soldiers, the promise of freshness sealed with a pop. But underneath the lids and labels was something deeper. These gatherings gave stay-at-home mothers a way to feel powerful. Selling meant earnings. Hosting meant purpose. Every product pitch was also a performance, a chance to shine in a world that often ignored domestic labor. Laughter echoed through kitchens. Stories were swapped between sales, and orders were written down with practiced excitement. Kids would peek around corners wondering why grown-ups were having so much fun over containers. It felt like a club, part practical, part glamorous. The catalog was a symbol of what your kitchen could be, how your life could be more organized, cleaner, even happier. For women who were told their value came from homemaking, these parties offered a small rebellion. You could make money. You could lead. You could do it all without leaving the house. And when the guests left with their bags of burping bowls and butter trays, it felt like more than shopping. It felt like success. These parties faded with time, replaced by online orders and supermarket shelves. But for one glittering decade, plastic containers were the foundation of something much bigger than leftovers. The Brady Bunch was not just a sitcom. It was a mirror held up to a hopeful America, one that wanted to believe that everything broken could be blended. A widow with 3 sons, a widower with 3 daughters. Together, they made a perfect mess of a family. For children of the 1970s, this show was more than after-school television. It was comfort. It was order. It was the dream of getting along even when everything changed. You saw yourself in Jan's jealousy, Greg's swagger, or Cindy's innocence. The shag carpet, the avocado kitchen, the tic-tac-toe lawn, it was all so vivid, it practically lived in your memory. It made divorce and remarriage look easy, even fun. It was not about realism, it was about possibility. The show taught you how to talk through feelings, even if the solutions were wrapped up neatly in 25 minutes. It taught you that families were not defined by blood, but by how hard you were willing to try. You sang along with the theme song like it was scripture. You knew that no matter the problem, school, dating, hair, there was always a resolution. It made growing up feel a little less scary, and when you look back now, maybe it was too perfect. But in a world that often felt messy, the Brady house gave you a place to believe that everything, somehow, could work out. Before trading cards became high-stakes business and digital downloads replaced bubblegum comics, there were Wacky Packages. Small, sticky, and hilarious, these stickers were everything a kid needed to feel like they were part of something clever. They parodied real brands, Cap'n Crud cereal, Crust toothpaste, and poked fun at the everyday items in your kitchen. For children of the 1970s, they were rebellion in cartoon form. You could stick them on lockers, notebooks, lunchboxes, anywhere adults would frown and kids would laugh. It was satire before you even knew the word. You felt in on the joke, like the world was just a little less serious when you had a wacky package in hand. Packs were cheap. The thrill of tearing them open was pure adrenaline. Would you get one you already had? Would you find a rare one? The collecting was addictive, the trading even more so. Schoolyards turned into mini stock exchanges, where one kid's duplicate could be your treasure. Teachers hated them. Parents rolled their eyes, but that just made them cooler. These stickers were the beginning of a lifelong love of irony and humor for many. They taught you to question branding, to laugh at consumerism, that maybe not everything sold to you was sacred, and now, decades later, you can still picture the garish art, the warped logos, and the feeling of being clever, just for laughing at laundry detergent. Pong was not just a video game, it was the crackling start of a digital age no one saw coming. In a darkened arcade or a wood-paneled basement, a small white square bounced between 2 rectangles, and it felt like the future had arrived. In the 1970s, Pong introduced children and adults alike to the very idea that machines could play back. It was slow, it was simple, but it was hypnotic. One button, one dial, endless tension. Could you angle it just right? Would you miss by a pixel? It was a battle of nerves and reflexes, disguised as a tennis match. It pulled people in, not with explosions, but with the thrill of control. Friends huddled around the console, taking turns, arguing over high scores. The beeps and boops became as familiar as laughter. Parents were skeptical. They thought it was a toy. But it was more than that. It was a shift. A quiet signal that entertainment was moving from the television to the interactive screen. Pong turned passivity into play. It made you active, involved, part of the story. And though games today are more complex, more realistic, more everything, none of them gave you the feeling Pong did, that this blinking pixel was somehow alive, that you were in the game. And for the first time ever, the screen played back. Charlie's Angels was not just a television show, it was a cultural awakening in bell-bottoms and feathered hair. In an era when women were still fighting for equal footing, this trio of private detectives kicked down the door with high heels and high style. Sabrina, Jill, and Kelly were not sidekicks, they were the stars, and every week millions tuned in to watch them outsmart villains, fight crime, and still look flawless. It was action, it was glamour, and for a lot of young girls, it was a revelation. These women were strong, smart, dangerous, and they did it all without needing permission. They were not waiting to be rescued. They were the ones doing the rescuing. For boys, it was a crush. For girls, it was a blueprint. Watching them felt like seeing the future, one where women were just as bold and capable as anyone else. Yes, the show was campy. Yes, it leaned hard into style. But underneath the glossy surface was something powerful: representation. Every time the Angels walked into danger with confidence, another crack formed in the glass ceiling. And for the kids growing up in the 1970s, those cracks mattered. They signaled that maybe, just maybe, the world was changing. Fondue was not just melted cheese, it was an event. In the 1970s, hosting a fondue party was like throwing a dinner and a show at the same time. A pot of bubbling Gruyere sat in the middle of the table, and everyone dipped in, one long-stemmed fork at a time. Bread cubes, apples, vegetables, all danced in the cheese like characters in a social ballet. It was warm, it was slow, it forced conversation, and it felt deliciously European. Fondue was about togetherness. You could not rush it. Everyone shared the same pot, the same space, the same pace. In a decade obsessed with convenience, this was rebellion through ritual. Even the cleanup was part of the charm. For kids, fondue night felt fancy. For adults, it was the kind of leisure that said, we have time, we have taste. Chocolate versions followed cheese. And suddenly, dessert became communal too. Marshmallows, strawberries, bananas, sweet-dipped memories on skewers. There was laughter, there was spilled wine, there was connection. Today, we microwave meals and eat alone on couches. But fondue was the opposite of that. It was interactive, intimate, and indulgent. And when the party ended, you felt full in more ways than one. Disco was not just music, it was movement. The kind that pulsed through your chest and told your body to rise. In the 1970s, disco swept through clubs, airwaves, and teenage bedrooms with a glittering swagger. The Bee Gees, Donna Summer, Chic. Their beats became the background to breakups, makeouts, and Friday nights that never wanted to end. Disco was light in the darkness. It was escapism with a beat. Under mirrored balls and strobe lights, people forgot their troubles and danced like the world would never stop spinning. And for a while, it did not. Disco was inclusive. Black, brown, white, gay, straight. Everyone could find themselves in the rhythm. It was the sound of unity, even if just for one night. It was freedom in 4-on-the-floor time. Parents called it noise. Politicians mocked it. But young people knew better. They knew disco was more than polyester and falsetto. It was the right to feel good, to be seen, to take up space. And when the backlash came, when disco records were burned and mocked, it felt like something sacred was being stolen. But the beat never really stopped. It just went underground. And in quiet corners of memory, it still plays, waiting for you to dance again. It was not just a haircut. It was a statement, a flag of coolness raised high across school hallways and roller rinks. In the 1970s, feathered hair took over like wildfire, cascading down the backs and shoulders of teenagers who wanted to look like they belonged in a magazine. The look was all about movement, soft, layered waves flipped away from the face, floating like wings. It was not stiff. It was not prime. It was wild and controlled at the same time. Farrah Fawcett's poster lived on thousands of bedroom walls, her hair practically glowing like a halo. Boys copied it too, feathering crossed lines, making it one of the first unisex styles to sweep American youth. Getting the look right took time, patience, and enough hairspray to knock out a small bug. You needed a round brush, a blow dryer, and some serious dedication. But once it was done, it felt like you had joined something, a club of effortless beauty and breezy confidence. Teachers hated it. Parents did not get it. But your friends? They noticed. They knew. Feathered hair was not about vanity. It was about identity. You were telling the world you had style, that you were paying attention, that you were here. And when the wind caught it just right, flipping it behind your ears like a scene from a movie, that was your moment. The kind you still remember every time a gust hits your face. There was a rhythm to it, the whirring click of the dial as it spun back after every number. It was slow, deliberate, and oddly satisfying. Rotary phones did not let you rush. You had to want the conversation. In the 1970s, these sturdy, clunky devices anchored every kitchen wall and bedside table. Their cords stretched halfway across the house, tangling around your life like vines. Making a call was a commitment. Misdial one number, and you had to start all over again. And when the phone rang, it really rang. A mechanical bell that could rattle your bones if you were standing too close. Picking up the receiver was like opening a door. You had no idea who would be on the other side. There were no caller IDs, no missed call logs, just a voice, sometimes familiar, sometimes unexpected. The rotary phone forced patience. It forced presence. You could not multitask with it. You sat down, you talked, you listened. And if the conversation went long, your ear got warm and your neck cramped, but you stayed anyway, because it mattered. These phones were built like tanks, heavy, reliable, and always there. They were a fixture in every household, a centerpiece of communication before everything became instant and disposable. Today, we swipe and tap in seconds. But there was a quiet kind of joy in that slow spin, that brief wait, that moment before the connection began. It felt like freedom. Pulling into a gravel lot under the open sky, car windows rolled down, static-filled speakers hanging from the window. Drive-in theaters were the closest thing to magic many kids in the 1970s ever experienced. There was something cinematic about the whole ritual, even before the movie started. Blankets in the back seat, popcorn passed from hand to hand, mosquitoes dancing in the glow of the projector. You were watching the big screen, but living a story of your own. First kisses happened there. First heartbreaks, too. For families, it was a cheap night out. For teens, it was a playground of possibility. The movie was important, sure, but it was also background, just one part of the experience. You could laugh out loud, talk during scenes, even sneak in friends in the trunk. And when the weather was just right, with the air warm and still, it felt like the whole world had pressed pause just for you. Double features stretched late into the night, and the drive home felt like floating. Today, we sit in dark theaters with strangers, faces lit by phones, silent and separate. But at the drive-in, the experience was shared across windshields, across families, across communities. It was noisy, it was messy, but it was real. You did not just watch a movie, you became part of one. It started with a jukebox and a smile. When Happy Days came on television, the world slowed down for half an hour. Set in the 1950s but broadcast in the 1970s, it was more than nostalgia. It was a lifeline to simpler dreams. There was something comforting about Richie's earnestness, Potsy's innocence, and Fonzie's leather-clad cool. The Fonz was not just a character, he was legend. With a snap of his fingers or a bump of his fist, he could make machines obey and crowds hush. But under the charm, the show was about family, about friends, about figuring life out one lesson at a time. And for kids growing up in the uncertain shadows of Watergate and Vietnam, this fictional past offered a soft place to land. You could laugh, sigh, and believe, even if just for 25 minutes, that the world could be gentle again. Happy Days taught you about loyalty, about standing up for your friends, about first dates and heartbreaks and how to be kind without losing your cool. You knew the theme song by heart. It played like an anthem, reminding you that somewhere, life could be bright and filled with milkshakes and diner booths. Watching it now feels like stepping back into a memory that was never yours, but always felt like home. Click, whir, wait. Watching a Polaroid photo develop was a magic trick you never got tired of seeing. You snapped the picture, pulled it out, and shook it like it could grow faster. In the 1970s, instant photography was a revolution. Suddenly, memories were not something you sent away for. They were something you held in your hands within seconds. No dark rooms, no labs, just light, film, and time. You captured birthdays, school dances, pets, and holidays. You documented the ordinary because the ordinary suddenly felt special when it appeared right before your eyes. The square white border became iconic. You wrote names on the bottom, drew hearts, wrote best friends forever in thick blue ink. The imperfections were part of the charm. A little blur, a smudge, red eyes. It all made the moment feel more real. Parents loved them. Teens adored them. Kids begged to push the button. Polaroids lived on fridges, in wallets, on bedroom walls. They were proof that you had been there, that you had smiled, that you had mattered. In today's world of endless photos, filters, and retakes, a single, imperfect Polaroid holds more weight than 1,000 digital snaps. Because it was honest, because it was instant, because you only got one shot. The air smelled like spring and slogans. On April 22, 1970, something shifted. It was the first Earth Day, and it spread like a pulse through classrooms, parks, and communities across the country. Suddenly, children were planting trees, picking up trash, and learning words like pollution and conservation. In a time of war and political unrest, Earth Day felt pure. It was something everyone could agree on. The planet was in trouble, and it was up to the people to save it. Teachers handed out buttons. Posters popped up with cartoon animals crying. The message was simple: act now or lose everything. Families joined in. Local events featured music, speeches, recycling drives. Some kids even marched with handmade signs, their crayons bleeding in the rain. It felt important. It felt possible. For a generation that had grown up watching smokestacks and oil spills, Earth Day was a wake-up call. It told you that your choices mattered, that nature was not endless, that small actions could ripple into real change. And even though it started as a one-day event, it planted something bigger. It gave children of the 1970s a cause, a sense of power, and the memory of standing in a park, dirt on your hands, feeling like a hero, that never leaves you. The sound was unmistakable, a sharp, rhythmic clack-clack that echoed through playgrounds and living rooms like a call to battle. Clackers were two acrylic balls connected by a string, swung up and down until they collided with terrifying precision. In the 1970s, they were everywhere, in backpacks, in coat pockets, in secret stashes under school desks. You did not just own clackers, you trained with them. Kids turned into street performers, mastering the hypnotic rhythm until the balls moved like extensions of their hands. They bruised wrists, cracked knuckles, and left dents in drywall. But that was part of the fun. The danger made it cooler. Every successful round felt like victory. Every failed attempt, a dare to try again. You showed off your skills like a magician, daring others to match your speed. Parents worried. Teachers banned them. News reports claimed they could shatter and send shards flying. But still, we clacked. Because they were more than toys. They were rhythm, challenge, power. Today's toys are safer, quieter, more digital. But nothing ever felt quite as alive or as rebellious as two plastic spheres slamming together in your hands. Clackers taught you coordination, sure, but they also taught you the joy of risk. Every wall had a secret, a pattern, a web of loops and knots that turned ordinary string into art. In the 1970s, macrame was everywhere. Plant holders dangling from ceiling hooks, wall hangings framing living room sofas, even jewelry made of twisted twine and wooden beads. It was a texture, a vibe, a mood. Macrame did not just decorate, it grounded a room. It brought nature indoors with neutral tones and hand-woven charm. Making it was part of the experience. You did not buy it, you made it. You sat on shag rugs, fingers tangled in cord, following patterns copied from dog-eared magazines. It was slow work, meditative, like knitting for the soul. You felt the tension in your hands loosen as the knots took shape. It was earthy, imperfect, personal. Every piece told a story. Every twist was deliberate. Parents did it. Teenagers did it. Even kids got in on the action, making tiny hangings for their bedroom corners. Macrame felt alive, like something passed down rather than mass-produced. Today, we hang prints and posters, we decorate with apps. But macrame was proof that art could be quiet, slow, and made by hand. That your walls could hold something soft, something you made. Your feet sank in. That was the point. Shag carpeting was not just a floor covering, it was a lifestyle. In the 1970s, it was the texture of comfort. The longer the pile, the better. You walked across it barefoot and left behind temporary footprints, like walking in snow. The colors were bold: mustard yellow, avocado green, burnt orange. No shade of beige dared enter. Shag carpet turned a room into a nest. It muted sound, softened footsteps, made even the coldest space feel warm. Kids sprawled out on it to watch cartoons. Teens lounged with magazines, phones in hand, cords stretching into the hallway. Pets disappeared into it. So did crumbs, socks, and secrets. Vacuuming was a nightmare. But no one cared, because shag meant style. It meant you had arrived. It matched your macrame. It matched your couch. It matched your life. Today's floors are sleek, sterile, and hard. But back then, we lived low to the ground, where everything felt softer, even the world. They were not called that at first, but when Catherine Bach stepped onto screens in The Dukes of Hazzard, the name stuck forever. Daisy Dukes, those impossibly short denim shorts, became a symbol of rebellion and summer and just not caring what anyone thought. Girls wore them to feel bold, boys noticed, parents rolled their eyes. But everyone understood their power. In the 1970s, short shorts meant freedom. No fabric dragging you down, just legs and sunshine and the thrill of being young. They were homemade most of the time, cut from old jeans, frayed at the ends, personalized with patches or marker art. They were what you wore when you wanted to feel seen, when you wanted the wind on your skin and music in your ears. Daisy Dukes were more than fashion. They were attitude, a little wild, a little dangerous, and totally unforgettable. You could feel the beach on your skin even if you were 1,000 miles from the ocean. Puka shell necklaces were more than a summer trend. They were a badge of the laid-back, sun-kissed soul you either were or wanted to be. In the 1970s, these smooth white shells, strung simply and naturally, circled the necks of kids, teens, and surfers alike. They said you were easygoing, cool, maybe a little rebellious. If you had one, you were in the club, even if you had never seen a wave up close. Wearing a puka shell necklace felt like permission to slow down, to walk barefoot, to drift wherever the wind or the music or your mood took you. They were sold at beach stands, festivals, flea markets, anywhere that felt just far enough from ordinary. Boys wore them proudly, a quiet rebellion against ties and collars. Girls paired them with halter tops and denim skirts, glowing in the golden haze of summer. These necklaces weren't about wealth or brand names. They were about freedom. And when the sun hit them just right, they seemed to shine with all the light of a memory you never wanted to lose. You did not just wear a puka shell necklace, you lived in it. They looked strange. That was the first thing everyone said. The heels sloped downward instead of up, putting your toes higher than your heels, like standing on a gentle slope. Earth shoes were not meant to be stylish. They were meant to fix you. In the 1970s, people wore them not to turn heads, but to realign them. Billed as posture-improving, grounding, and natural, Earth shoes came with the promise of a better you, from the feet up. They were part of the health-conscious, back-to-nature movement that swept across the decade. Wearing them said, I care about how I walk, and maybe how I live. And when you walked in Earth shoes, you felt the ground more. That was the point. You noticed the way your body moved, step by step. They were not just shoes, they were philosophy for your feet. Today they might look like relics. But back then, they were walking statements of a quieter revolution. It started with a yellow circle and 2 black dots, a simple smile drawn to brighten up a workplace. But by the 1970s, it had become something much bigger, everywhere, on everything. The smiley face was more than a logo. It was a feeling, a hope, a little sun on a pin. You saw it on buttons, t-shirts, lunchboxes, coffee mugs, and even wallpaper. It winked from notebooks and bumper stickers. It cheered up grocery bags. It followed you into stores and classrooms and dreams. It became the unofficial mascot of the 1970s. Cheery, slightly cheesy, and weirdly profound. But under the cheerfulness, there was something deeper, maybe even desperate. Because behind every exaggerated grin is a question. Do we really feel as good as we pretend? Maybe not. But wearing that face gave us permission to try. It reminded us that happiness could be a choice, or at least a style. It was optimism pinned to your chest. And in that decade, people needed it. The pot sat in the center, bubbling quietly like a promise. Fondue parties in the 1970s were more than food. They were a ritual, a little theatrical, a little decadent. They slowed everything down in the best way. You dipped bread or fruit or meat and talked while it cooked. There was no rushing. That was the point. Cheese came first, then chocolate, sometimes even hot oil for meats. Each dip felt like a secret being shared. Everyone had their fork, their story, their turn. The fondue pot became a kind of fireplace, drawing people close in a circle of warmth. In a time when everything was starting to speed up, microwaves, fast food, television, fondue pulled you back. Into conversation, into community, into that lovely melting moment where time itself seemed to soften. And when it was over, there were no leftovers, just memories, sticky with sweetness. It started with a photo on the wall. Farrah Fawcett, beaming, her hair like wings frozen mid-flutter. And suddenly, every girl, and quite a few boys, knew what they wanted. Feathered hair was more than a trend. It was a dream on your head. In the 1970s, it was everywhere. Soft layers flipped back just so. A breeze built in. You needed a blow dryer, a round brush, and a whole lot of patience. But once it was set, you felt invincible. It bounced. It glowed. It made walking down the hallway feel like a movie entrance. It was not about vanity. It was about freedom. Your hair moved with you, said something for you, said you were cool, confident, and maybe just a little bit wild. And decades later, we still remember what it felt like to walk into the world with wind in our hair, even if it came from a hairdryer. If you were a kid in the 1980s, there were 2 ways to rebel. You could get grounded, or you could collect Garbage Pail Kids. What started as a gross-out parody of wholesome Cabbage Patch Kids quickly mutated into one of the most controversial and overstimulating franchises of the decade. The trading cards were wild enough, oozing noses, melting eyeballs, radioactive vomit. But that was just the beginning. Suddenly, they were everywhere. Garbage Pail Kids lunchboxes, bed sheets, pajamas, notebooks, puzzles, even Halloween costumes. It was like someone said, "What if childhood was more disgusting?" And the market responded, "Yes, please." Parents hated them, teachers banned them, some schools even confiscated them on site. But for kids, they were pure rebellion in sticker form. Every new pack was a gamble. Would you get Atom Bomb or Leaky Lindsay? Either way, it was peak 1980s absurdity, but the brand overdid it. What once felt underground became overexposed, and by the time the infamous Garbage Pail Kids movie dropped in theaters, it was game over. Gross became exhausting. The merch wave collapsed under its own snot-covered weight. Still, it was fun while it lasted. Now, let us talk about another trend that looked sweet and innocent, until summer arrived and your feet begged for mercy. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them, others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. Tang was not just a drink. It was an icon of American space-age optimism. Though developed in 1957, it exploded into fame in the 1960s when NASA used it during Project Mercury and Gemini missions. Suddenly, drinking Tang meant more than just orange-flavored powder. It meant drinking like an astronaut. Kids begged their parents for it. Commercials showed bright pictures on sunny breakfast tables with the promise of vitamins and space-fueled energy. It came in a foil pouch, dissolved into water with a quick stir, and tasted like the future. The orange flavor was tangy, a little artificial, but full of excitement. Parents loved it for the no-mess prep and long shelf life. Children loved it because it made them feel connected to the cosmos. No one cared that it was mostly sugar and flavoring. Tang had a mission patch of approval. It became a staple in American pantries, always ready for a quick mix on a busy morning. By the end of the decade, it had grown into more than a drink. It was a symbol, a bright orange badge of the space race, proudly poured into plastic cups across the country. And for many, one sip still tastes like childhood and liftoff. Let us be real. Shoulder pads were not just a fashion statement. They were a fashion exclamation. And somehow they trickled down from business suits and power blazers to teenagers. Yes, nothing says youthful rebellion quite like looking like you are gearing up for a scrimmage with the Chicago Bears. In the 1980s, you could barely pick up a sweater or jacket without finding a pair of foam triangles stuffed into the lining. For adults, it was about power dressing. For teens, it was just confusing. You would throw on your favorite sweatshirt and suddenly look like a linebacker on picture day. They made you look older, broader, and weirdly more square. Removing them was a gamble. They were usually sewn in with all the stubbornness of a century-old family secret. But for a while, they were everywhere. Dances, school photos, family reunions. Looking back, it is hard to say what the appeal really was. Maybe we all wanted to look like business executives trapped in high school. But if shoulder pads were trying to make kids look powerful, the next musical invention went even further. It said, let us wear our entire keyboard as a guitar. Let us talk about the rise and rapid fall of the keytar. Cabbage Patch Kid frenzy turned toy stores into battlegrounds. These soft-bodied dolls with unique, slightly odd faces were the must-have gift of the 1980s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers, making it feel like you were bringing home a real baby. But getting your hands on one? That was another story. Parents lined up at dawn. Some camped overnight. Others sprinted through department stores in scenes more suited to action movies than holiday shopping. There were arguments, tears, the occasional tackle, and when someone finally scored a doll, they clutched it like it was made of gold. Kids loved them. They named them, dressed them, and carried them everywhere. Some families had to settle for knockoffs with names like Garden Patch Pals that never quite felt the same. But if you had a real one, you were a legend. Looking back, it seems wild that a doll caused so much chaos. But in that moment, nothing mattered more. Cabbage Patch Kids were not just toys. They were trophies. Proof that your parents had braved the crowds and won. And decades later, those round faces still sit on shelves, quietly remembering the madness they caused. Fondue parties were peak 1960s sophistication, cheesy, communal, and irresistibly fun. Imported from Switzerland and embraced by American hostesses everywhere, fondue turned dinner into an event. Friends gathered around bubbling pots of melted Gruyere or Emmental, long forks in hand, dipping cubes of crusty bread into molten gold. It was interactive, slightly exotic, and made conversation flow almost as much as the wine. The fondue pot itself became a household item, sleek, colorful, often gifted at weddings. There were rules. Do not drop your bread in the pot, stir in a figure eight, and keep the cheese smooth. Some added white wine or garlic, others experimented with chocolate fondue for dessert. Either way, the evening was about more than food. It was about sharing, laughing, and leaning in, literally and socially. In an era that embraced kitsch and community, fondue was a perfect fit. It brought people together in a circle, turned dinner into performance, and gave every guest a role to play. Long before tapas or charcuterie boards, fondue was the original shareable meal. For those who remember the scent of wine and cheese wafting through a mid-century living room, it was a flavor and feeling that defined the times. All came together for the golden age of synth pop in the 1980s, and while some bands carved out legacies that still echo today, there were many that burst onto the scene with one song, rode the radio waves hard, and then vanished like a fog machine in a gymnasium. These were the one-hit wonders of synth pop. Groups with names that sounded like computer errors, album covers that looked like laser tag invitations, and beats that could only be danced to under a disco ball or beneath neon lights. You probably remember the song, maybe even the music video, but ask someone to name a second track and all you will get is a confused look. They were catchy, addictive, and short-lived. It was like the sound itself had an expiration date. Still, the moment they were hot, they were hot. The genre was all style, minimal substance, and maximum eyeliner. But when the synthesizers started to fade and guitars came roaring back, these acts had nowhere to go. Much like their lyrics, they just drifted into the static. But if the music was fleeting, the next trend tried to leave its mark forever, sometimes quite literally, on your notebook paper. Waterbeds promised the future and delivered waves of regret. On paper, they were perfect, a heated mattress that cradled your body like a floating dream. But in practice, not so much. Every turn sent ripples across the surface. You tried to roll over, and the whole bed sloshed like a bathtub during an earthquake. Getting in without making a tidal wave was a skill. Getting out without sliding to the floor was an Olympic event. They were heavy, hard to move, and leaked at the worst times, usually at 3 in the morning, soaking everything from socks to shag carpet. Still, they were trendy. If someone had a waterbed, it meant they were either incredibly cool or easily convinced by an in-store demo. Some people swore by them. Others swore at them. Pets hated them. Kids loved jumping on them until they learned that waterbeds and sharp objects do not mix. But for a brief, glorious window in the 1980s, having a waterbed meant you had arrived. It was furniture and flex all in one. Looking back, they were impractical, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of a basement, one is still gently sloshing, waiting for its comeback. Lite-Brite turned a dark room into a glowing gallery. Introduced by Hasbro in 1967, this toy was unlike anything else at the time. It featured a black screen lit from behind and a box of tiny colored pegs, red, green, blue, orange, that you pushed through holes to create luminous designs. You could trace pre-printed templates or freestyle your own masterpiece. A clown's grin, a sailboat at sunset, your own name glowing like a neon sign. The warmth from the light bulb behind the screen gave it a cozy feeling, and the soft glow made your room feel like magic. It was quiet play, patient play, the kind where your tongue stuck out in concentration and the world around you disappeared. Parents loved that it was mess-free. Kids loved that they were in control. Once finished, you sat back in the dark and admired your work, a tiny artist with your own spotlight. Over time, more templates arrived, cartoon characters, animals, seasonal themes. But even with no pattern at all, the effect was the same, a toy that made you feel like a creator. In a world before screens lit up everything, Lite-Brite let you light up something of your own, one peg at a time. The 1980s were not just colorful, they were textured. Enter puffy paint clothing projects where kids became designers and your closet turned into a craft aisle. You would grab an oversized sweatshirt, some neon puffy paint, and go to town. Maybe your name in bubble letters. Maybe a dolphin jumping over a rainbow. Maybe just abstract blobs of color that looked like a melted ice cream truck. The point was not perfection. It was personality. These paints dried thick and rubbery, forming crusty shapes that cracked after one wash. And forget drying time. You had to leave that sweatshirt on a hanger for a day, hoping no one touched it and left fingerprints in the masterpiece. Once dry, you wore it proudly, to school, to the mall, to family dinner. But comfort? Out the window. The back of the paint rubbed against your skin like sandpaper. Heaven forbid someone hugged you. You would both end up glittery. Still, it was a rite of creative passage. You were a walking art exhibit whether you liked it or not. But if you thought your sweatshirt was stiff, wait until you remember the home appliance that tried to combine two technologies and ended up giving you the worst of both worlds. VHS rental adventures were more than just picking a movie. They were the night's main event. You walked into the store greeted by rows of clamshell cases, each one shouting for your attention with over-the-top artwork and dramatic taglines. New releases lined the front wall, but they were often already rented, marked by empty plastic holders and your own growing disappointment. So you wandered. Comedy? Horror? Something animated for your little brother? You judged movies by their cover. You flipped tapes to read the backs, squinted at blurry screenshots, and made last-minute switches at checkout. There was pressure. Choose wisely. You had this movie for 2 nights, maybe 3. Forget to rewind? Expect a fee. Some stores even had a "Be Kind Rewind" sign that became a national motto. You got home, made popcorn, and watched together as a family. The sound of the tape sliding into the VCR meant it was officially movie night. VHS rentals turned average evenings into little adventures. They made choosing a movie feel like a quest. And even though we stream everything now, nothing beats the charm of browsing those old shelves and hoping your top pick had not been snatched first. Operation was not just a game, it was a test of nerves. Released by Milton Bradley in 1965, this battery-operated board game turned you into a surgeon, operating on a cartoonish patient named Cavity Sam. He lay there in his hospital gown, wide-eyed and helpless, with little cavities holding ailments like a funny bone, a wishbone, or a Charlie horse. The goal? Use tweezers to remove each piece without touching the metal edges of the cavity. If you slipped even slightly, the board buzzed loudly and Sam's red nose lit up. That buzz? It haunted dreams. Kids would wince, laugh, and shout all at once. The challenge was as much about steady hands as it was about keeping calm under pressure. Operation was competitive, silly, and oddly tense. You might remember tilting the board to cheat or holding your breath during a particularly tricky extraction. It was often pulled out during family game night, and even adults found themselves sweating over the tiny butterfly in the stomach. Operation was more than a toy. It was an experience, a rite of passage, and the first time many kids learned that success sometimes comes down to keeping a steady hand. Trapper keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. There are sunglasses, and then there are plastic sunglasses in wild shapes, triangles, stars, lightning bolts, even squiggles. These were not designed for function. They were designed for flair. And in the 1980s, flair was everything. You could barely see out of them. The lenses were tiny. The shapes made no ergonomic sense. But when you slipped them on, you felt like the king or queen of style, until you walked into a wall. These shades were perfect for a costume party, maybe a concert, but not much else. They pinched your temples. They slid off your nose, and God help you if you wore them outside. You would squint harder than a mole in the sun. Still, for kids and teens, they were a badge of honor. They screamed individuality. They screamed rebellion. They also screamed, "I bought these from a vending machine for $1. But we loved them. We matched them with windbreakers and scrunchies and felt like we belonged in a music video. And when we were not wearing ridiculous sunglasses, we were sticking our noses into the weirdest fad of all. Let us talk about the trend that brought scent to everything. Books, stickers, toys, and occasionally, regret. Etch A Sketch was a toy box essential for many kids growing up in the 1960s, a red-framed tablet that made art out of turning two little white knobs. Created in France and introduced to the American market in 1960, it was as magical as it was mechanical. There were no batteries, no screens, no noise, just pure possibility inside that gray, powder-filled screen. The left knob controlled horizontal lines. The right knob handled vertical ones. And with patience and lots of do-overs, you could draw a house, a name, even a passable Mickey Mouse. But here's the kicker. If you messed up, you just shook the thing. That satisfying rattle erased the entire image in an instant, giving you a clean slate. It was frustrating. It was addictive. It was mesmerizing. You might remember twisting the knob so hard your fingers hurt, trying to make curves when all it wanted to give you was straight lines. Yet when you finally got something to look just right, the pride was real. Etch A Sketch was art, logic, and trial and error rolled into one simple frame. In a world of ever-evolving toys, this one stayed still, and that was its power. If you had a motorized toy watch in the 1980s, you were basically James Bond for about a day. These things were advertised as cutting-edge wearable tech for kids. They came with secret compartments, built-in games, tiny motors, and sometimes a mini flashlight that barely lit up a crayon box. It was like strapping a malfunctioning robot to your wrist. The appeal was instant. They looked cool, they blinked, they buzzed, but they rarely did any of it well. Most of the time, they stopped working after a couple of recesses. Batteries died fast, buttons got stuck, the motors jammed. And the plastic? Usually cracked if you smacked it against a desk. But for that brief window when it worked, you felt invincible. Until the alarm started going off randomly in class and your teacher confiscated it. Or worse, You opened the compartment only to find that whatever secret feature it had just did not. But still, you wore it proudly, because style always beat functionality in the 1980s. And nowhere was that more true than in the next trend. A fashion accessory that tried to blast your favorite jams but mostly just sat on your hip doing nothing at all. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. Slide projectors were the original family theater. Before smartphones and digital albums, the only way to share vacation photos was by dimming the lights, pulling down a screen or a blank wall, and clicking through a carousel of 35mm slides. You could hear the quiet hum of the machine, the mechanical clunk as each new photo dropped into place, and the occasional groan from someone who had already seen them twice. But there was magic in it. These evenings were about more than just pictures. They were about storytelling. The beach trip where Dad sunburned his feet. The blurry shot of Grandma mid-sneeze. The perfectly framed sunset over the Grand Canyon. Families would laugh, tease, and remember together, sometimes with popcorn, always with commentary. The projector cast not just images, but atmosphere, the darkened room, the warmth of shared memory, and the feeling that what you were seeing mattered because everyone else was seeing it too. Slide projectors may be obsolete now, but for those who grew up in the 1960s, they were a rite of passage, a way to relive moments in slow, glowing frames, one dusty click at a time. The mini boombox was supposed to be the coolest thing you could clip onto your belt. A pint-sized party machine, a radio revolution in your pocket. But in reality, it was all look, no boom. These things were everywhere in the late 1980s, bright, plastic, and usually in neon colors that matched your windbreaker. They were meant to let you carry your music wherever you went, like a portable dance party. Except the sound quality was trash. The volume was barely louder than a whisper. If you were outside, forget it. Wind was louder. And the tape deck? Constantly ate your favorite cassette, if it even had a tape deck. A lot of them were just FM radios disguised as full-function players. But hey, they looked cool. They had fake speakers, shiny knobs, and some even had stickers that made them look high-tech. You could strut down the sidewalk, mini boombox on your hip, headphones plugged in, until the batteries died an hour later. And that was the end of that. So yes, it flopped. But it flopped with style. And if you thought that was noisy, wait until we revisit the school supply that became an auditory menace in classrooms across America. The Velcro symphony known as the Trapper Keeper. Payphone predicaments were a daily part of life before everyone had a phone in their pocket. You needed a quarter, maybe two, and a working booth to make a call. No signal bars, no group texts, just a heavy receiver, a scratchy dial tone, and sometimes a sticky keypad. Finding a payphone that was not broken or graffitied felt like a small miracle. If you were lucky, it worked on the first try. If not, you banged the receiver, tried again, and hoped your coins did not disappear into the void. Making a collect call meant saying your name faster than humanly possible. "Hello, mother, please pick me up right now," before the machine cut you off. Privacy was non-existent. Everyone could hear your conversation. Rain? You ducked into the booth and hoped it did not smell like sadness and cigarette smoke. Nighttime? Good luck. The glow of the payphone sign was a lonely beacon, but it was all we had. We memorized numbers. We waited in line. We scrounged for change in pockets and glove compartments, and when the call finally went through, it felt like a victory. Payphones were clunky, inconvenient, and unreliable. But they were also our lifeline, 1 quarter at a time. Which tradition hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments and hit like and subscribe to keep the memories alive.